If you want to hear the details about Carrie's life that weren't included in the movies, then stick around to the end of this video. This video is sponsored by Audible. I've covered a lot of characters in Stephen King's universe of stories here on the show, so in this week's episode, I'm taking it back to the one that started it all. Welcome to Horror History, my name is Professor CZsWorld, and in today's lesson, I'm joined by my TA, the Amagi, as we cover the entire life of Carrie White. Carrie was created by the then rookie author as a sort of combination of two girls from his childhood. The first was in grade school with King, and she was made fun of by some of the other classmates for wearing the same clothes to school every day. The other lived in his neighborhood with her mother, and one time the mother hired him to move some furniture, and when he went inside, he realized that they're crazy religious. Neither of these girls would live to read Carrie though. One was personally responsible, while the other one had problems with seizures. Their fates may tie in to what ends up happening in Carrie, but before we can get there, I'm gonna take it all the way back to the conception of Carrie White. Margaret Brigham and Ralph White were married on March 23, 1962, and that same year, they first engaged in what Margaret would refer to as a sinful act. So she made her husband promise never to do it again. She fell down one day and lost the baby. Then she assumed that this was their punishment for their sins, that God did not want her to have the baby. One night, Ralph started giving her that look again. I'm not gonna do it right here on camera because I don't want to be a father, but she sent him away, and when he came back, she smelled the scent of Roadhouse whiskey on his breath.
9 months later, on September 21, 1963, she gave birth to Carrietta N. White. Margaret's mental state deteriorated throughout the pregnancy, and she planned to kill Carrie with a knife upon birth because she believed her daughter would be a carrier of the devil. But when it came time, she could not bring herself to do it, instead using the knife to cut the umbilical cord. She would try again 3 years later in 1966. Here's what went down. Mrs. White had long feuded with her neighbors, the Horan family, because their daughter Estelle would sometimes sunbathe in the backyard, which was within Margaret's line of sight. Mrs. Horan found this complaint ridiculous, and in retaliation bought Estelle a new bikini and encouraged her to use it whenever she liked. So 3-year-old Carrie wandered over to a sunbathing Estelle one day and posed the question.
I'm sorry, that was too easy not to do. When Estelle explained the concepts of breasts to her, Carrie wished that she could get them too, because her mother had taught her that good girls don't get them as part of her wacko religious beliefs. Estelle tried to explain the truth to Carrie, but not before Margaret came out and started screaming at her, to the point that Estelle started to get into it with Margaret. Mrs. White was clawing at herself, grinning and drooling, in what she saw as punishing herself to make up for what Carrie had seen. This kind of self-destructive behavior warped Carrie's mind from a very young age and caused her to have an imbalance in her brain as she grew older. She drags Carrie into the house and forces her daughter to go into the closet to pray, which Carrie strongly disliked because the religious imagery scared her. So she did what any kid would do and threw a fit. However, Carrie White was not like any other kid. She was born with a special gene that researchers would later refer to as the TK gene. TK was an acronym for telekinesis, the ability to move objects at a distance via the use of mental power. Both of Carrie's parents had this gene, but it was recessive in her mother, so it only showed up in Carrie. Carrie's grandmother was also supposedly a fire starter, an ability that would be explored more in another Stephen King novel, but it's not known if the gene for this is the same as the gene for TK.
The neighbor, Estelle, heard Carrie's screams emanating from inside the house, and this is what set Carrie's telekinesis off. It started when a huge chunk of ice was pulled down and thumped against the Whites' roof. Then it was several chunks of ice, and keep in mind, this is happening in the middle of August. The ice stopped and Margaret started screaming again. That's when the Whites' kitchen table went crashing out the window, a small sample of the magnitude of Carrie's power. She brought down a rain of stones upon the house. Neighbors watched as they burst through roof shingles, punching holes through the ceiling. The stones consisted of chunks of granite, which only came down on the Whites' property. The stones that didn't hit the house left small craters in the backyard. The event became known by the neighborhood as the Rain of Stones, and I think it's no mistake that it was triggered by Carrie finding out about the pubescent development of breasts and her mother punishing her for it. Carrie's powers would be fully unleashed when she herself reaches the age of her budding adulthood, so there seems to be a comparison going on between sexual awakening and telekinetic awakening.
It wouldn't be the last time that Stephen King would make a similar comparison, as you know if you've seen my horror history on Beverly Marsh from It. It seems that Carrie started going to public school in 1st grade. This may have coincided with her mom getting a job at the Blue Ribbon Laundry when the insurance money from Ralph's death had run out. Carrie is described as a chunky girl with pimples. None of the movies hold true to this description, probably because her beauty is supposed to blossom by the time of the prom, and you can do that in a book, but in a movie, your best bet is just to hide her looks until the prom scene comes around. Carrie did not get along well in school though, though, and quickly became a social outcast. This was most likely due to her psycho mother, and the fact that she was forbidden from taking part in most social activities. She also had a few particularly nasty classmates like Christine Hargensen and Helen Shires. In grade school, Carrie went to a Christian youth camp where they would short sheet her bed, hide her underwear, and put a snake in her shoe.
There's a snake in my boot!
And pass around a love letter addressed to Flash Bobby Pickett that they'd found in Carrie's possession. If you're wondering who Flash Bobby Pickett is, I don't know where the name Flash comes from. That seems to be exclusive to Carrie, but Bobby Pickett is the guy who wrote the Monster Mash. And if you're wondering what the Monster Mash is, it was a graveyard smash. And if you're wondering how it became a graveyard smash, it caught on in a flash. Okay, maybe that's where Flash comes from. Carrie had to be brought home from camp a week early. On her first day of grammar school, she was laughed at for praying at lunch. As you can probably imagine, the torture from the other kids and the abuse from her devil paranoid mother would continue as Carrie moved on to the next layer of hell, commonly known as middle school. There is a lot you can learn here on Horror History, but if you really want the full Stephen King experience, you gotta check out the novel. There are so many characters, interviews, and snippets from articles within the world of Carrie that you're missing out on if you don't. The best way to enjoy Stephen King's Carrie is with Audible. The audiobook is narrated by Sissy Spacek, the actress who plays Carrie White in the original movie. How cool is that? Audible is a great option for that person you care about or for yourself. Now is the best time to do it with a special offer of 53% off your first 3 months. Access an unbeatable selection of audiobooks including bestsellers, mysteries, thrillers, and of course, horror. You can choose 3 titles every month, 1 audiobook and 2 exclusive Audible originals that you can't hear anywhere else. Listen on any device, anytime, anywhere with the Audible app. It's great while commuting, at the gym, or during your holiday travels. With Audible, you'll also enjoy easy audiobook exchanges and your own audiobook library you keep forever, even if you cancel. Right now, for a limited time, you can get 3 months of Audible for just $6.95 per month. That's more than half off the regular price. Give yourself the gift of listening. For more, go to audible.com/CZsWorld.
One of the few activities that Carrie White was allowed to partake in were these biking trips. Actually, it doesn't seem that she really wanted to go, but maybe it was a church activity or something. In school, a boy named Billy Preston put peanut butter in her hair. Now, according to Rhett and Link, he was actually doing her a favor, but the deep-seated rage continued to build inside of her. People would pinch her, stick out legs to trip her in class, knock books from her desk, and tuck obscene messages into her bag.
In high school, Chris Hargensen prank called her, asking if she knew how to spell pig poop, and then spelling Karrie, which I have to say is not even that good of a prank call, but I guess this was before iconic masterpieces like Arnold Schwarzenegger prank calls travel agency and keeps asking about the guy they lobotomized.
May I have your email address, please?
Yeah. What do you mean we?
In order to book this, may I have your email address, please?
What about the guy you lobotomized? Did he get a refund?
What guy?
I can't. Carrie would have to endure cruel punishments that she didn't deserve, like being locked in the closet for an entire day after stealing a 49-cent plastic ring, and another time when her mom found a picture of Flash Bobby Pickett under her pillow. Guess she really likes the Monster Mash. At one point in 7th grade, she seemed to try to call out for help when she turned in the following as a poetry assignment in English class. Jesus watches from the wall, but his face is cold as stone. If he loves me, as she tells me, why do I feel so all alone? This is a piece about her time being locked inside the closet by her mother, and while the instructor did find that it seemed to cry out to him, he did not pursue the topic any further. But perhaps the biggest moment came during Carrie's senior year of high school. Carrie was the last to shower after gym class in an attempt to avoid the other girls when she got her period. Like the Rain of Stones, when she was 3, it was her mother's neglect to give her a proper education due to Mrs. White's unsound levels of piousness that once again caused the issue. Carrie believed that she was bleeding to death because she'd never learned what a period is. Her mom didn't teach her, and she didn't have any friends to learn from. She staggered to the other girls who were finishing up getting changed, and they found it hilarious. They basically saw this as the equivalent of Arnold calling the travel agency.
I just need an email address so I can email you your confirmation.
Okay. 2, 3, 5, 7.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm done. I'm done now, okay? So the whole gym class started chanting, period, and throwing tampons at her. And in her confusion, Carrie collapsed in the corner. The gym teacher, Mr. Jardin, came in to see what the problem was and ended up slapping Carrie in the face to try to bring her to her senses. A light bulb explodes overhead, and this ties Carrie's outburst of anger to her telekinetic power.
Once Ms. Desjardins realized that Carrie didn't know what a period was, she tries to comfort her and get the other girls away. She ended up having to explain the concept of menstruation before getting Carrie cleaned up and taking her to the office of the assistant principal, Mr. Morton, where he files an accident form and decides to give Carrie the rest of the day off. Mr. Morton repeatedly calls her Cassie instead of Carrie one too many times, and she snaps at him. "That's not my name!" she screams suddenly. Mr. Morton recoiled, and Ms. Desjardins jumped as if struck from behind. The heavy ceramic ashtray on Morton's desk, it was Rodin's thinker with his head turned into a receptacle for cigarette butts, suddenly toppled to the rug as if to take cover from the force of her scream. Butts and flakes of Morton's pipe tobacco scattered on the pale green nylon rug. Like the light bulb, this is another example of the fervor of her telekinesis matching the anger pent up inside of her. She had a lot of anger on hand to dish out pretty much at will, which we see shortly after she walked home.
At this point, Carrie is fed up with having endured 17 years of harassment. There's only so much that a person can take, so it's understandable that her thoughts would turn dark. But what makes this scary is what happens next. A 5-year-old boy riding his bike on the street makes fun of her and calls her Creepy Carrie.
Creepy Carrie! Creepy Carrie!
So that little f***er gets air yeeted right off that bike. Carrie would also try to use her TK to break a window on the way home, but she's only able to make it wobble, showing that she's yet to fully master the ability. She still has to practice more before being able to fully channel her rage at will. But later that afternoon, she was able to crack her mirror while self-loathing about her own reflection. Her mother came home after getting a call from the school. Carrie notices the fear in her mother's eyes. There are a few examples in the book where Margaret seems to be able to sense Carrie's rising power, but it's likely that she perceived it as the devil inside of her daughter waking up. Mrs. White struck her and then forced her head into the altar they had in the living room, commanding her to pray for her sins, to which she insisted that she had not sinned. This was a turning point for Carrie, because up until now, she had no reason to believe her mother's lies. She was also about to graduate high school and didn't want to live under the harmful hand of her mother forever. And that's why I think she chooses this occasion to fight back. As Margaret tried to pull her daughter away into the closet, Carrie refused to go quietly, raising her voice and using profanity against her. Again, the fear is evident in Margaret's eyes. Carrie threatens to make the stones come again, remembering the outburst that had occurred when she was 3, and her mom calls her the spawn of the devil before dragging her and locking her in the closet. This was probably the most she'd ever fought back against her mom, but I think that's because of her rising fear. The punishment is not as severe as Carrie might have thought. Carrie even thinks that her mama may have been afraid that she'd blow the closet door right off of its hinges if she was kept in for too long. Carrie took a little bit of time off of school and used it to further hone her telekinetic abilities. She would practice at home in her room by picking up the foot of her bed and placing it back down. Her heart pounded with excitement as she did so, and at night she would dream of sending stones after her mom and the kids that bullied her at school. When she goes back to school, she keeps to herself even more than usual, hoping to avoid being the subject of laughter and gossip about what happened. But that Thursday, after her 5th period study hall, she received a surprise visit from a boy she was attracted to, Tommy Ross. Tommy was the boyfriend of Susan Snell, one of the girls who had made fun of her in the locker room, but who was not otherwise normally a bad person. Tommy ended up inviting her to be his date to the spring ball. This is the moment that I've been hyping up in every horror history to date, so pay attention. What happens next is kind of interesting. It's not entirely clear if Carrie is able to shine yet. Shining is an ability in Stephen King's writing, allowing people, most often kids, to read minds. She's able to do it by the end of the story though. Her first instinct is that Tommy is tricking her, that he's only inviting her to humiliate her somehow. If she'd been able to shine, she'd know that his invitation was genuine. But perhaps she did shine, and she saw that Tommy didn't want to ask Carrie to the prom, which is also true because he was only doing it to please Sue, who felt bad about the locker room incident. For these reasons, Carrie rejects him at first, but he is persistent about it, and she worries that she's gonna make him late for his next class, and she accepts.
That week, she goes into town and buys some fabric to make herself a dress. Sewing was one of the few hobbies her mom allowed her to have, so she was quite familiar with the Chamberlain Woolsworths where she bought her material. She had not yet broken the news to her mother, which caused her a great deal of anxiety and stress, which of course translated to telekinetic energy. On Saturday night, Carrie prepares herself to tell her mother of the prom invite, knowing that she is unlikely to approve. And she doesn't. Okay, the tea was only lukewarm, but you get the idea. As expected, Margaret orders her to go to the closet, but Carrie refuses, looking to make a statement. They get into a huge argument because Margaret sees this as the next step towards a path to the devil.
To the blood come the boys, like sniffing dogs, grinning and slobbering and trying to find out where that smell comes from. Where the smell is, that smell. Listen, I know where they're taking that cars. I've seen it all right. Well, you're not going.
Carrie tells her that she's tired of being made fun of and wants to start fitting in with her classmates. She wants to live her own life, not be stuck living her mother's. Her mom calls her a witch, and I see that as another important step towards Carrie's breakdown. Even though her mother did not treat her properly, she was still her mother, and Carrie knew no better than to look to and love her. Not to mention that she was one of the only people Carrie could actually talk to. If her mother started to oppose her, she would have nobody to go to the next time she is humiliated and be forced to turn down a darker path, and that day would soon come. Margaret retreated upstairs and began whispering exorcism prayers.
On May 26th, the day before the prom, Carrie went to go talk to Tommy one more time before the big event. She waited outside one of his classes so she could let him know that she'd have to be in by 11:30 p.m. as not to upset her mother more than she already had. Tommy thoughtfully suggested that after the dance, they go to the Kelly Fruits to get a root beer and a burger. He figured it would be a good place to unwind since many of the other kids would be going to parties in other cities, and it would most likely be empty. Sue would later comment on the exchange in her book. "This is the girl that they keep calling a monster. I want you to keep that firmly in mind. The girl who could be satisfied with a hamburger and a dime root beer after her only school dance, so her mama wouldn't be worried." The day that Carrie would first put on the dress would soon come. It was May 27th, 1969. As Carrie examined herself in it, the door swings open to reveal her mother holding a Bible.
Red. I might have known it would be red.
The red dress is symbolic of everything that this night stands for. Prom night is the night that high school students dress up like adults, practice the rituals of courtship, and in most cases do adult things afterwards. Like paying taxes. Okay, no, we're talking about sex. The red dress is a perfect metaphor for that because it was the red blood of Carrie's first period that made her transition into adulthood evident. And from her mother's point of view, as I pointed out in my Things You Missed episode on the 1976 movie, red is also the color of the devil.
Carrie did not know if her powers came from Satan or if they were a gift from the Lord, but she was beginning not to care and would use her powers against her mom in order to attend the prom if necessary. Margaret asked her to burn the dress and pray for forgiveness with her, which of course angers Carrie. Ironically, the dress would be one of the few things at the prom to not burn. Carrie uses her mind to swing the door shut on her mother, who goes down to go to work. That night, Mrs. White spends at least 2 hours praying in their home chapel, so Carrie is forced to pin the corsage to the shoulder of her dress herself, an image that is indicative of how she was now truly alone with nobody to turn to. As it got later, Carrie got more nervous. Thoughts creep into her head about Tommy standing her up, and she actually starts to think that this would be for the best. There would only be 1 more month of high school, so the humiliation wouldn't last all that long. But then she thinks about being stuck with her mother forever, about going over to the 86-year-old Mrs. Garrison's house and watching game shows and soap operas rather than starting her own life. Carrie is restlessly picking up objects with her mind and putting them back down on the ground when she hears Tommy's car approach. Her mother's chanting stops as she hears the buzzer.
When Carrie answers the door, neither one of them says a word at first, until she says, "Do you like me?" And he replies with,
"You look beautiful."
With that, the two set off together, not knowing that this would be the final evening of their lives. When Tommy Ross pulled into the parking lot, he asked her if she was nervous, and she said yes. But I think the next scene does a far better job of communicating how nervous she actually was. Everyone stopped to look at Tommy and Carrie as they entered the prom, creating a momentary silence that was only broken by Tommy's buddy George Dawson coming up and throwing a mock insult about his appearance. Dawson lurched forward with his fists up, and for a moment, Carrie felt stark terror. In her keyed up state, she came within an ace of picking George up and throwing him across the lobby. Then she realized it was an old game, often played, well loved. Carrie was obviously very on edge, so George's date Frida tries to calm her down by joking that she'll dance with Carrie if Tommy and George kill each other. She also asks Carrie about her dress and is very impressed that Carrie made it herself. As the four of them go into the dance together, George is doing Flash Bobby Pickett impressions. What is it with this Flash Bobby Pickett? This is like the 3rd time he's come up.
When they entered, Carrie found the dance to be glamorous, and there's a line where she specifically views the long flowing dresses on the dance floor to be like wraiths. Maybe that's a foreshadowing of all their impending deaths. As Carrie, Tommy, George, and Frida admire the mural, Carrie knew she'd remember the moment forever, but perhaps what she did not know was that forever would only be a few more hours. George takes Frida onto the dance floor, and Tommy and Carrie decide to sit down. One of the bullies, a girl named Norma, takes them to their table asking about Carrie's dress as she does so. Norma comments on how different Carrie looks, the one time in her life that she actually fits in for a short while. But Carrie notices something of a secretive look on Norma's face, and that makes Carrie nervous, and for a good reason. Norma was part of a conspiracy created by Chris Hargenson's clique of girls known as the Mortimer Snurds, who planned to humiliate Carrie by getting her elected as prom queen, where Hargenson would pull the cord to have a bucket of pig's blood dumped all over Carrie.
Tommy asked Carrie to dance, but she told him she just wanted to sit for a while. In reality, she had no idea how to dance and wanted to avoid the embarrassment. She asked Tommy to light the candles at their table, which may be another foreshadowing, this time about how the night would end in flames. At 9 p.m. that evening, Tommy asked Carrie to dance for a third time, and she finally admitted that she did not know how. They end up waiting for a slower song, and that's a scene in most, if not all, of the movie adaptations, but what the movies fail to explain is that the dancing isn't the only thing that makes Carrie uncomfortable. She's also bothered by the idea of going out there to rock and roll music, which is something that Carrie's mother has conditioned her to see as sinful. And if that's true, I'm going straight to the bottom layer of hell. I probably am anyways, let's be real. They go around to talk to some of the other tables, and Carrie sees people bringing out the king and queen thrones, and she thinks that they're beautiful, and imagines her and Tommy winning the crown. Maybe this was just her imagination running wild, because she's obviously not going to be a popular choice without intervention, but maybe this was actually her shining and seeing a little glimpse of the future where they're victorious. When they get back to the table, Tommy goes to get her a little bit of punch, and Carrie sees the gym teacher, Mrs. Jardin, who tells her about her own experience at the prom, how she had been taller than her dates, how the corsage he'd given her had clashed with her gown, and how the broken tailpipe on the car made a horrible noise.
What's up, guys? It's Tana Mojo.
But that she still found it to be a magical night. I only bring this up because they've changed the story in literally every adaptation.
I had a date with the captain of the basketball team. He was 6 feet 7 inches tall. Anyway, we went in his pickup truck, which of course broke down, and we had to get out and walk the last half mile to the prom. My date brought a toy gun so he could pose like James Bond for the picture.
Oh, he sounds like fun.
Yeah. They arrested him. I didn't have anybody to dance with. Spent the entire night alone until my father picked me up.
Anyway, Carrie tells Mrs. Jardin that she couldn't quite tell her how the prom made her feel. Tommy comes back with the punch, and Carrie thinks that the encounter with Mrs. Jardin was her way of saying she's sorry for everything that happened in the locker room. At 9:30, the class president, Vic Mooney, who would be one of the few survivors of the Black Prom, announces the opening of the ballots for prom king and queen. Carrie is surprised to see her and Tommy's name on the ballot, which Tommy explains is the school voting for single candidates and their dates getting shanghaied into it. Tommy suggests that they vote for themselves, and Carrie giggles. When she does so, she's surprised at the sound of her own laughter, which is one of those things where if you think about it, it's incredibly sad because she's never had friends, and so she's never really laughed even in her entire life. And I'm not gonna play the clip. Don't worry, I'm not gonna play the clip. But it was before this video, so there were less reasons to laugh in the world. While filling out the ballot, she accidentally hurts herself as the pencil breaks in her hand. Like the small candles, I think the small amount of blood that's drawn is a tiny preview of the splashdown that would soon come.
The Honor Society collects the ballots, and the students watch as 2 piles stack up higher than any of the others. And eventually it is announced that UN High School has had its first ever tie. 63 votes for Frank Grier and Jessica McLean, and 63 votes for Tommy Ross and Carrie White. They decide to hold a runoff ballot to determine the winner. This time, Carrie begged Tommy not to vote for them, perhaps sensing that something was going to go wrong. But Tommy had promised Sue to try to give Carrie the best night possible, so he elects to try to vote her in anyways. It was 10:07 p.m. when the secondary ballots were collected, and again, it looked like it was going to be close. Tommy and Carrie end up winning by just 1 vote. Had Tommy listened to Carrie and held back his vote, perhaps the whole disaster could have been avoided.
Okay, so I was actually curious about what would happen if it was a tie again, and I looked it up and found some random school in Ohio that had their rules posted online. They said they'd also institute a second vote if the initial poll is tied, and then if that one is tied, there can be multiple winners. Though I feel like Hargenson still probably would have dumped the blood just to get revenge on Carrie for getting her in trouble at gym class. Ushers would appear and lead Carrie and Tommy to their thrones while the band played the school song. They took their place in front of the crowd, and everything had fallen into place for Christine Hargenson. And although she hesitates at first, she pulls the cord, which turns through the pulley and attaches to the 2 buckets of blood sitting on the rafters above the prom king and queen thrones. After the massive red splash came down, Carrie looked like she'd been dipped in red paint. For a moment, the gymnasium was completely silent. The 2 buckets clinged together, and one of them came down and hit Tommy in the head. And the winner by split decision is the Buckets! Someone started to laugh at the noise that the bucket made when it knocked out Tommy, but it wasn't until Carrie opened her eyes back up, the only part of her that was not red, that everyone started to crack up. but they'd soon find out that Carrie White would be the one to have the last laugh.
Ms. Desjardins ran up to her aid, and although she was not laughing on the surface, Carrie could hear the giggling reverberate through the gym teacher's head, so she uses her TK to push her aside where she goes crashing into the wall. Carrie ran through the crowd where someone tripped her. She crawled away and ran out of the gym, out of the lobby, down the stairs, and outside of the school. With the laughter behind her now, she got her feet tangled and fell into the grass. The whole thing had only been about 2 minutes. She was filled with tears, and her first instinct was to return home to her mother in shame. And had Mrs. White treated her daughter better, that may have been the end of it. But then again, if that had been the case, probably none of this would have happened. Carrie thinks about the closet and about how long she would be locked in at this time, about what her mother would do to her, and that's what made her snap. Just as she did to little Tommy Earpter on the bicycle, Carrie decided to use her powers for evil.
She ditches her shoes and walks barefoot back to the lobby, and all at once slams the doors shut. The screams she heard from inside were described as being like sweet soul music to her. The panicked crowd stampedes towards the doors, where Carrie stares at them back through the window. People battered against the doors, which did not budge. Some went out the back fire doors, and Carrie allowed them to escape, thinking that she'll have time to pick them off later. She uses her minds to turn on the overhead sprinklers, and when everyone was soaking wet, Carrie could not hear them crying, so she decided that the sprinklers were not enough. She pulled out the power cables into the puddles of water that now covered the gym floor, causing a huge flash of light, and the electrocution of one of the performers holding a microphone stand. After another flash of light, his shirt had caught fire, and one of the main power switches backstage exploded. Light cables writhed in the air, and one of them came down into the water, causing yet another violent flash. Carrie went back down the stairs, all while holding the main doors closed with her mind. With the entire gym on fire now, she made her way onto the streets. The town fire whistle sounded, and I think that was what caused her momentarily to lose hold of the doors, but she quickly regained it and slammed them back shut, catching someone's fingers inside as she did so. Now, the movies always seem to underappreciate the damage that Carrie did to the town after leaving the high school for the last time. She headed into town and had the realization that the fire department may put out her creation, so she telekinetically twisted the fire hydrant lug nuts, perhaps the most mentally draining use of her power yet, based on how it is described. She's able to open the valves and water bursts everywhere. Carrie's heartbeat speeds up as she realizes she's essentially won. The gushing water is a symbol that connects the shower scene where Carrie was hurt and humiliated to the Rampage scene, where Carrie pays that back to the entire town of Chamberlain. She goes to the grass plaza, where she's seen trying to rub her hands clean on the side of her dress, and she opens a few more fire hydrants before heading up to the gas station, Teddy's Amico. When she got there just before 11 o'clock, she removed all of the nozzles and made them pour gas onto the ground, until someone unknowingly dropped a cigarette. This caused a massive oil tank explosion. Shortly after, at 11:12 p.m., Carrie had the entirety of Main Street in flames. Her next target was the other gas station in town, Tony Sitko, which exploded at 11:15. The blast was so big that it temporarily lit up all of Summer Street in what looked like daylight. This was followed by another secondary explosion. Her progress was slowed a little bit, but not halted when she stepped onto a broken bottle in the street. This is a small reminder that she is human despite her terrifying powers, and that she too could be hurt just like anyone else, something that would soon come into play. She arrives at her next destination at 12:06 a.m. on the morning of the 28th, where she's able to use her minds to locate and open the gas main underneath Jackson Street. Shortly after, she's seen going inside the Carlin Street Church. This is purely speculation, but I think she hoped she'd find the answer to one of the last questions that had eluded her to this point. Was she really an agent of the devil, or were her powers a gift from God? When she received no answer, she used a whirlwind of psychic energy to destroy the inside of the church. She emerged from there at 12:11 and telekinetically swings the door shut behind her. She also took out power transformers and dangled live wires onto the street. One of these cables even reached a nearby house and set that on fire as well. And remember that gas valve that she opened on Jackson Street? Well, at 12:17, an ambulance attendant pitched a cigarette butt out the window and set that ablaze too. See, if the regular dangers of smoking were not enough to deter you, take Chamberlain, Maine in 1979 as an example. Damage could have been basically cut in half if people weren't lighting up. And this guy was an ambulance attendant. He's literally supposed to keep people healthy. Why does he even have a cigarette? It was not long after that when prom turned into homecoming, because Carrie found herself back at the door of the small house on Carlin Street. The lights were entirely shut off when she arrived, the only illumination coming from the raging fires approaching from the town. Objects fell from the walls as she got close, and when she arrived, she blew all the living room windows outward and slammed the kitchen door. Carrie is described to this point to have completely lost touch with her humanity, but being back in the presence of her mother may have brought her back down to earth a little bit. Either that, or she was starting to realize the severity of what she had done, because when she stepped into the house, she was trembling and whispering out for her mama. Her dress was in tatters. Like the poem she handed in back in 7th grade, her return home had a deeper meaning than what was on the surface. But the mother and daughter were so mentally unhinged at that point that there was only one inevitable outcome.
When the two confront each other, Margaret hides the kitchen knife that she's spent the last several hours sharpening. Yeah, calm down, Margaret. She tells the story of Carrie's conception and the pregnancy, how she planned to slay the devil inside her when Carrie was born, which drives her crazy. She channels her telekinetic anger into the plates in the kitchen, which they both hear exploding. Carrie was unable to follow through with what she planned to do to her mother at first and begged for help.
I think many people would argue that Carrie was not a monster, but rather a victim of her own circumstances. And if there's any evidence of that, this part is probably an example. Margaret asks her to pray with her one more time, but when Carrie bows her head, Margaret brings the knife down over her. Carrie seems to sense this at the last moment and mentally moves the trajectory of the knife. Mom! The way that Carrie kills her mom has got to be one of the coolest uses of telekinesis that I've seen anywhere. She tells her, "I'm gonna give you a present, mama," and then she looks into her chest and slowly brings her mother's beating heart to a stop. I just think that's so metal, because there's basically nothing you can do to defend yourself against that. Carrie could not stick around long though, because the flames from the fires in town had spread as close as next door, and the roof, which she had already destroyed one time 14 years ago with the stones, was starting to ignite. Carrie slipped out the back door. She crosses through backyards, and when she can no longer walk, she crawls up an embankment, not stopping until 1:15 a.m. when she arrived at a roadhouse known as the Cavalier.
A bunch of people were going to the Cavalier after.
It's even suggested in the text that this could be the same roadhouse where Ralph White had stopped the night that Carrie was conceived, and she'd crawled all of this way to come destroy it. But her main motive, most likely, had more to do with who was at the Cavalier. Chris Hargensen and her boyfriend, Billy Nolan, who had helped set up the buckets of blood. They had just heard about the disaster and gotten into the car to flee when Billy turns on the headlights. Chris screams because Carrie White is standing there with a crazed look on her face.
Instinctively, Billy just floors it, and as they approach, they hear the words Carrie, Carrie, Carrie being chanted in their heads over and over. It seems that when Carrie's sanity snapped, so too did her ability to keep her shine inside of her own head. Most of what we know about her rampage through the town obviously doesn't come from Carrie firsthand, but those who encountered her and lived to tell the tale could hear her thoughts as if she were no longer a radio, but now a radio station. It's never spelled out for us how exactly this works in the book, but there is one point where Sue seems to believe that the zone of Carrie's influence was shrinking as she was starting to die.
If the unscrewing of the fire hydrants wasn't Carrie's most impressive feat, then what would come next definitely is. She spun the car around in a half circle and sent it flying into the Cavalier. Billy is thrown through the windshield and Chris crumbles against the dashboard before the vehicle explodes. That seemed to take up the rest of Carrie's remaining energy. She laid on her side, panting, trying to drag herself across the parking lot. She felt that nothing else would matter as long as she could turn herself over and see the stars one last time before she died. But she did not even have the strength to do that. The last person Carrie White ever encounters is Sue Snell, the one girl who tried to give Carrie that one good high school experience at the prom, the one person who actually had her best interests in mind. Sue turned her on her back, her final wish fulfilled, and Carrie, in a moan, asks who's there. When she finds out that it's Sue, Carrie accuses her of being in on the trick, to which Sue asks her to look inside her and see the truth. Carrie does so, scanning the library of Sue's mind. The concept of a metaphysical library or warehouse of memories is consistent with some of King's later writings like Dreamcatcher and Dr. Sleep. Carrie searches through all of Sue's thoughts and memories, but finds no evidence of a plan to sabotage her at the prom. With that last little piece of mind, Carrie pulls back out of Sue's head, but in what I can only imagine is some kind of telekinetic equivalent of Newton's third law, Sue gets sucked into Carrie's mind against her will, and perceives her final thoughts. She hears Carrie crying for her mother. Her last conscious thought is, "Mama, I'm sorry, where?" before fading out into the black. Carrie White's official time of death is recorded at May 28th, 1979 at 2 a.m. Carrie was one of King's most misunderstood characters. If you read the book, you get a better understanding of how Carrie was just a normal girl, but she's pushed into being an outcast by everyone around her. And the idea of her telekinesis and mind-reading abilities that seemingly nobody else has is a metaphor for her forced separation from the rest of society. The concept would become a staple of the author's work, but Stephen King has actually gone on record saying that Brian De Palma's 1976 movie adaptation of Carrie is the superior version of the story. De Palma brings in many more concepts, themes, and motifs in his interpretation of the tragic tale, so we decided to do a second video over on Amagi's channel analyzing the entire life of Carrie White in the movie. And if you like horror history, definitely go subscribe to his channel. He covers the lives of many other of your favorite characters, including those outside the horror genre. Remember to ring that death bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the second video, assuming we both survive.